Hi, good morning, everybody. And so, you know, when I look back over my growth in science, when I started science, in terms of the environment and the culture of science, or the culture of the practice of science, um, when I started, there was a lot of interest in understanding mechanisms, understanding processes, the whats and the whys, and so on. And that used to engage not me, my peers, and in a sense the global scientific community, and a lot of discussions about that. But over the years, what has happened is science as, let's say, a wisdom gathering activity slowly appears to be diminishing, and where we are now is currently the emphasis is how do you give back to society, and the pressure on that dimension of science seems to be increasing, not just in India but globally. And many of the young students, when they come out, they will be asked a question. Many of us are already asked the question today: is what have you done for society? So it starts, what was a primarily an intellectual exercise is now becoming or slowly evolving into a delivering kind of strategy. So it is a good time to revisit the question of what do we understand as science, looking at these two extremes of of expectations. How do we, what is our notion of what science is? What do we understand as science? And it sounds like a trivial question, but actually, if you go into it, it's a very, very difficult question to answer. There are the classical dichotomies about science versus religion, but are they in any ways are they different? If so, what kind of differences exist? Because to say that there is no faith component in science, when we say my passion drives my science, it implies personal faith. It's not a logical, objective exercise. So I thought it's a good idea to have just have an open discussion on how do we understand science, and are there any attributes that we can classify as scientific activity as opposed to any other everyday activity that we pursue. And so, so if I ask, throw open the question, yeah, please, yeah.
For instance, if one were to say that there is some such thing as a subject and the other thing is the object opposed to it, is it true that in some sense scientific practice implies a gradual absorption into the object? That is to say, the object becomes more important and it slowly cuts away at whatever one might call the subjectivity or I-ness or my sense of being and so on. Is there a tendency within practice to kind of undercut that aspect in some sense?
Anybody wants to look at this? So, in our practice of science, do we see ourselves, in a sense, at least emotionally merging with the area that we study? Is that, in a sense, what you're asking? Taking it away from an existentialist kind of thing? But if I were to, so just correct me if I'm posing your question wrongly, because the question, do you become one, or in I guess in a way emotionally linked to the object that you're studying? And if what you say is yes, are you objective about what you do in any way? So again, how distinct are you from religious belief, for instance, right? Isn't it the same?
Essentially, and I've been thinking about it when Sarita posed the questions, that problem essentially lies down in how you very precisely define the semantics of the word science. Right?
Correct.
And you raised a very fundamental question that ties to that aspect. How do you define semantically what science means? So if you go for objective streams of science, such as mathematics, physics, engineering sciences, where you can very precisely define the term rationality. It has to happen within the framework of logic. You have a very mechanized process. A implies B, B implies C, and so on and so forth. And there you can actually, cut yourself, your subjectivity, from the perception itself. But one may come back and say that, well, perception itself is subjective, right? One may view things very differently than the other. So this problem gets amplified even more in subjective sciences, in human sciences. So I think we are back to that.
Yeah,
we are
so,
back
so,
to
so
how do you-
to come back to that, is logic really an objective exercise or is it subjective? So, if I were to use Thomas Kuhn's notion of the paradigm, so if you accept that, see, okay, for those, so, okay, maybe I'll just introduce, I think one of the classical books that every student of science must read is The Structure of Scientific Revolutions by Thomas Kuhn. And the game changer there is, see, we all intuitively believe science is the pursuit of, in a sense, truth, right? True nature. But Kuhn's argument is that there is no such thing as absolute truth, And it's a very interesting argument because it's a never-ending argument. It's like if you tell me God made the world, I will ask you who made God, right? And it can go on like that. In science too, it goes on because for every mechanism you come up with an explanation. That explanation demands the next level of explanation. And what Thomas Kuhn says, so basically what we do is shift from one paradigm to another. And so it's one set of ideas to another. And classically his examples were Newtonian mechanics to quantum physics, for instance. Or the Ptolemaic model of the universe where he said the earth was the center of the universe as opposed to shift to Copernicus where he turned it around. Right? Biology we haven't seen such paradigm shifts. Largely it's been accumulative, starting with Darwin and then Lamarck, Mendel, to DNA and so on. But, so the point is then are we, so at any given time we follow a set of ideas. So today in biology we follow the paradigm that cells have different kinds of molecules, the genetic material is DNA and the functional entities are proteins and so on. And so all of our work is done within that set of ideas. We have accepted that framework as the given set of ideas. Who knows, 5 years from now somebody may turn out and actually show proteins code genes. I mean, as an example, suddenly our entire perspective has turned around. Again, from Newtonian to quantum physics kind of thing. So all the logical frameworks we develop, say in an experimental sense particularly, is within that paradigm, is defined by that paradigm, right? So is that still an objective process or is that subjective? Come on, throw in your mind. You're going to face these.
Yeah, I think the lines are becoming more fuzzy with each passing year. The idea of establishing causality itself is involving a lot of subjectivity.
Sure.
And the whole idea of scientific process is to establish causality, be it in human sciences or in objective science.
Okay. So do we actually establish causality in science or do we establish probabilities of causality? Right?
That's how
So-
we are. Yeah.
Right. I think that is the important distinction, say, from religion. Religion is much more finite, definitive. If religion says there is a God, it implies there is a God. A scientist who said there is a 98% probability that God exists, right? And we often forget that. We become dogmatic in what we do and we forget the p-values or the student tests that we add. There are fallacies in that too, but I think the uncertainty, the continuing uncertainty, knowing that there are newer boundaries that we don't know yet, that we can reach, is perhaps what distinguishes science from any other activity. I don't know. If somebody wants to differ, I'd be happy to, any other alternate opinion, right?
Yeah, basically, if we see so very critically and be very 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 critical.
Sure.
So then now science is also turning to be more like a belief.
More like a belief.
More
Yeah.
like a belief. It's becoming like
So
a belief.
if I were just as an argument, I may treat it as a belief. I may be dogmatic about what I do and be very, very narrow-minded about it. But does that challenge what the essential nature of science? Because science is always defining dimensions of probability, right? So it's like, okay, I may be a bad, God-fearing person doing bad things, but that doesn't damage the notion of religion, right? It only reflects on me and my limited capabilities. So it's all, so when you say in science it probably exists, likely exists, right? Recognizing that there are limits to the degree of certainty I can have in any one theory, hypothesis, whatever. So would that be the same?
No, basically, as we say, the religion is based on belief. because we accept there is something. But of course, there are the two kind of beliefs too. One is called blind belief, another is called rational and logical belief.
Sure.
So in science also, basically our science is based on the rationality and logics. But as you said, even in the certain defined set of the logics, if we start to believe it, then it's become a belief.
Rather than using the term belief, I would say science is more based on hypotheses. So around the thing that, let's say, a concept that I may believe in, I would have to, being a scientist, put up a hypothesis and then go about trying to prove it right or wrong.
That's true.
If I end up proving my hypothesis right, then I may consider it as a valid belief. I would say that is the way of science.
But there are time scales associated, right? So when Copernicus said the sun, heliocentric universe, perhaps took many years to, decades to even get a sense of it, right? So in that intervening period, was it science or was it just non-science? Similarly, Charles Darwin, right? When he proposed evolution, I mean, it took several decades before we started getting evidence. It fit the laws of parsimony, it fit logic, but then so many alternate explanations can also fit that logic. So in the intervening 20, 30, 40 years, somebody who, let's say, believed Darwinism, was it faith or was it science?
And increasingly we are moving away from proving things to statistically showing that it's statistically significant because of the subjectivity involved in it.
Yeah.
Proving means then resorting back to a framework which is completely deterministic in nature. Your logical framework is completely deterministic. Your proof strategies are completely deterministic. So whenever there is an element of non-determinism, be it in the environment or in your perception, then proving things become extremely hard. Then only we can claim is, this seems to be statistically significant.
Yeah.
This is what is our observation.
But I think it was 17th or 18th, David Hume, right? He criticized such an approach, saying that in all of this we assume nature is uniform, right? So when I say 98% probability of, based on this mutation I get this or whatever, I'm assuming humankind is uniform across. And any biologist today will tell you, no, it's not the case. A statistics I get from a population study in India may vary considerably from elsewhere. So again, we're furthering the bounds of uncertainty here, right? So even there, is that a belief system or a scientific rationale saying that, using statistics in the underlying belief of everything is uniform across the board? So it starts off as a simple question, but if you start getting into it, it gets very complex. So what is it that we do?
I would say that there is also one predictive aspect to all these beliefs. So suppose I have a model for certain phenomena around me, then maybe I should be able to use them or use this model to design something that I want to do.
Correct.
So that kind of automatically offers a test for my model. If it fails, then I should look for a new model. So at least we should be open that, we believe, meaning all these transitions that you said from, say, Newtonian mechanics to relativity, all those happened because there was an experiment where people found that the existing model didn't fit that. And so you are looking for new model. Many people were looking for new models, but one of them succeeded.
One of them succeeded,
right?
absolutely.
So I think there are always these type of phenomena that probably are outliers from the current models, and they can possibly change our belief system in some sense.
So right. So this is what one of the Popper's argument, Karl Popper's argument, right? Every hypothesis should be falsifiable for it to be qualified science. But on the flip side, no hypothesis explains everything completely, right? There are always anomalies, outliers in any hypothesis. So how do you treat that then, right? I mean, let's say you may explain 90-95% of the events. So do you treat them as the remaining 4 or 5% as outliers or contesting your hypothesis? So then do you use an objective criteria or a subjective, I like the hypothesis, so the 5% are outliers. I don't like the hypothesis, 5% are actually contesting the hypothesis.
That, because there are 5% outliers, it probably means that my model needs more refining, so that those are also included in future possibly.
Right, okay.
So that is how I look at it.
But that is because you have faith in the hypothesis. Right, I could,
Those 5 or 20
right,
outliers,
right.
and
So it's like how Neptune was discovered, right?
Yes,
So
definitely.
Uranus was not rationalized by Newton's laws, but these guys loved Newton so much they set out and they actually discovered Neptune. So was it unscientific? Or was it?
Tended to be true.
It's interesting. Yeah, sorry.
So the other dimension that also plays a huge role in science, which is again, truth at a particular point in time. So the temporal nature of it. How much we know at that point of in time, and based on that very knowledge, can we hypothesize? Can we make a model? And as we go forward, our set of observation can possibly increase, based on which a refinement of models can also possibly happen. Therefore, a lower truth gets superseded by a higher truth.
Right. Yeah, I think that is the other feature. I mean, what Kedar was also saying is that we are exploring the anomalies, right? And we may end up in a situation where they begin to fit, more of them begin to fit, or they actually lead to a breakdown in your hypothesis. So that perhaps is one of the key features of science. It doesn't happen in other everyday activities that we do. We follow rote lifestyles, but this is one. I don't know. Please feel free to challenge it, but this continuous testing, evaluation, eventually could be the core of the scientific method. Taking nothing for granted, although you temporarily may believe something, but there is enough evidence to blow it away, you're forced to kind of turn it over.
I mean, that's something that seems to be common between science and religion, in the sense that if you were to say, very basic definition of religion would be that, the fact of the fact of God, the fact of having already arrived of God, and whether one is able to actually address that issue, that becomes the existential question, whether one can actually, whether one is qualified enough, whether one is able to actually, recognize that is the struggle in some sense of believers. So in some sense here the struggle seems to be of a similar kind, where there is a kind of an agony, there is a kind of an agon where you're working through various possibilities. You're not sure whether they're going to. So I mean, I see that what both systems seem to have in common is something like a struggle, or something like an agonizing. What in philosophy is called the dark night of the soul. Something of that kind.
But if I were to, so in the question of spirituality or God, whatever, the struggle is to know God, right? God as a notion exists definitively, right? In science, again, correct me if I'm wrong, I mean, it's just a personal perspective. In science, there is nothing definitive about anything. Again, to take the classical example, when Newton came up with his mathematics and gravitational theory and so on, we had a very satisfactory explanation of the world around us, why objects moved, how they moved and everything, right? But that didn't stop us from questioning and finally breaking that down at the next level of insights, right? And now from quantum, when you go to these particles, you actually don't see anything. It's a lot of logical inference. So nothing stops. The process is almost continuous, maybe even infinite. Whereas qualitatively, my understanding is when you talk about God, it's trying to understand that process. Never, the notion of questioning it as a religious person doesn't exist. Maybe as an agnostic or an atheist, yes, but I don't know, would that...
I think in the last 200 years in all the religions, there's been a lot of questioning along modern, patterns where you're actually subjecting that doubt to question. For instance, in Protestant theology or Catholic theology, they used a lot of stuff from philosophy. So they are willing to question to a certain extent.
The fact of God itself, or
not
what God predicts, what God wants you to do?
The arrival of God in your life. In what sense, what are the manifestations, those are all subject to, so in that sense philosophy and religion seem to come very close to each other, because they're both willing to question. So it's not some kind of a, completely unquestioning assumption. And I think that kind of theology has happened in all religions, especially in modern Buddhism, but of course in all the religions of the book and so on. So, and in Hinduism too, through Vivekananda and so there's been a lot of the whole discourse of karma yoga, whether one should act, whether one should hold oneself in. So in that sense, it seems to me that they've come together, and so therefore there seems to be that kind of a commonality, where there is a fact, but you're willing to question the extent to which you can access it.
So this is an interesting point. Let's, what do your students who are doing PhD have to say? That religion and science converge, is beginning to converge, right?
Yeah, I think, traditionally the scientist and the believers has been in a confrontation mode. So this is the real problem. Now the scientists, they try to belittle the believers, and in the vice versa, the believers belittle the scientists. And they both hold the valid argument against each other. In certain cases, when the scientists pose many questions, the believers cannot answer. Similarly, the believers ask many questions, the scientists cannot answer. And as we mentioned, there is no absolute truth, neither in the science, neither in the belief. And when we say there is nothing absolute truth, and we say even whatever notion we have right now, it has certain shortcomings. It's like incomplete or it is error prone. And with this erroneous system, we try to evaluate something. So what will get out? From an erroneous tool, we are trying to measure something. Definitely we will get the erroneous result. And we know that whatever science we have, it's not perfect. It's not perfect. In the evolution phase, what is right now, we believe as a truth, that can be proved as a wrong.
No, I think that, so what is right now, we believe as, in a sense, probable truth, right? Never forget this, that the probability criteria we always include.
But when we go confrontation with the believers, we consider it as the perfect, we consider it as the truth. And then we judge the believers and their faith. But we accept it's not perfect. So how we can judge something which is imperfect or something else? With imperfection we judge or we measure something. Definitely we will get the imperfect results.
So in science, you're in a way we never have precision tools to measure, but they're the best at that point in time, and they keep evolving. I think that process of growth, and without the fear of overturning the paradigms, or without the choice. I mean, if things break down and new hypotheses come up, so be it. That in many ways is, could perhaps be a strong point of science, right? Tomorrow hypothetically somebody proves proteins make genes, and if the evidence is strong enough, we may just have to rewrite our textbooks. It has happened in the past, and it will likely happen again.
Basically the pinnacle things in both science and religions, when it comes to the God, the biggest question is where comes the God? Similarly in science we say the entire universe came from nothing. The big question is from where it came of.
Correct.
And then we finally come to one answer as a scientist. There was a primordial matter. From that primordial matter everything comes up. Now the biggest question is from where the primordial matter comes up. So at the end the sciences lead to the same zero answer, similarly the believer and to the same zero answer.
Correct.
So the big question is how as a science we are different from the believers.
So if I were to say, no. So but if I were to say, that, we're not, in terms of science, it's not an endpoint driven activity, right? It's a process. And at a given stage of our civilization, whatever, we attempt to answer the question that interests us, and as we move along, they get deeper and deeper. And you're right. I mean, you talk about origin of life, origin of the universe, the Big Bang theory, what came before that. But in many ways, the strength of the scientific process, you don't stop. You go as deep as you can, to whatever level you can at that given point of time, right? Maybe 50, 100 years from now, we may be able to go to the next level of question. So we are believers for today, but perhaps we will disbelieve the same paradigm that believed in today tomorrow. I mean, that's the we may adopt a new paradigm, and then after that another paradigm, and so on. So it's not I don't know if it's a dialectical process, certainly a process that is continuously evolving. Is that, like I say, is that similar also what happens in religions and so on, or?
I mean, there's also the element, I mean, I think in certain kinds of religious thought, there's also the element of, deep anxiety. For instance, I mean, Pascal has this famous statement. Pascal, was also a mathematician.
Yeah.
This famous statement where, am I just a pathetic creature caught between spaces that are infinitely large and infinitely small? And when I look around these infinite spaces, I feel scared.
Right.
So in that sense of the pathos of being this one little, insignificant creature in the midst of this kind of this sense of empty infinity is scary for the believer.
Correct.
And then he has this famous wager where he says, okay, there are two possibilities. Either God doesn't exist, in which case we are finished, and perhaps God exists, in which case perhaps there's something to be gained. So let me go with the second possibility. It's a wager, in that sense. So those kinds of things, I think you find that religious thinkers end up having to, and here's somebody who's actually a scientist, he's a scientist and a believer, so very interesting.
Right. No, but also that is the same, one of the major reasons for resistance against Galileo's, reaffirmation and confirmation of the heliocentric, right? So, so the believer at that time was, am I just sitting on some rock that is hurtling through space, or am I somebody who's the treasure of God's eye, So that fundamental dichotomy, and in many ways, if you believe the spirit of science, it's actually a challenging, it's not an easy exercise. We practice science, but to what extent we believe, because the fundamental, feature, attribute of science is uncertainty. And it's not easy to live an uncertain life, right? It's much easier to be dogmatic and, you're not good, I'm good, I know everything, you don't know everything. But to say I actually don't know anything and I want to find out to what extent I know, certainly is not a comfortable way of living life.
Also
Yeah.
be honest about, to say that I don't understand this.
Exactly.
Should be,
Correct.
should be comfortable with it.
Yeah.
That is the biggest
Absolutely, yeah.
instead of attaching some name to it.
Correct.
Actually, try to say that I am going to be comfortable with this fact that at the moment I cannot explain this, but maybe in future I will. I don't know.
Right. Exactly. Yes. So that actually is not an easy way to live your life, as not being sure of anything around you, and it needs actually an immense strength of character to actually live that kind of a life. I don't know. Hey, students, guys, let's hear something.
I believe science and religion to come on the same page is very difficult, because religion, it's kind of constant. They want to objectify some power source, whereas science, it's self-evolving. It always evolves based on the techniques. For today we have something, we consider this to be the ultimate thing. Next time we have some more advanced techniques, so we'll evolve, we'll find something else. So in science, but in religion we have some source. We have a written book or something which is the ultimate source of power.
Stick by it forever, yes.
Stick by
for
it. It
centuries.
doesn't evolve. So I think science and religion, it's kind of to come together, it's very difficult, I believe.
Yes, if you start with something questioning that whether it is existing or not, then you may end up with some answer. But if you directly say that there is something, then I don't think your mind will evolve much.
But it also,
there is a God. If I say there is a God.
So if I say I question, during not evolution, but say during the, let's say the, what is it called, the settlements coming up and so on. Everything starts from observation, right? So I observe things around me. The sun comes up, sun goes down in those days. And suddenly the wind blows and so on. So I can interpret this as some divine force at act, right? So that I'm also interpreting an observation there, right? So is that scientific? Is that not scientific?
If I questioning that whether it is divine or not.
So testing the hypothesis, right?
Then you may end up with some answer that there is a God or not. But if you are making yourself comfortable with that there is something, then I think nothing will evolve.
For a long time it was believed that plants, for example, even at the time of the holism versus reductionism debate between Aristotle and Descartes, it was both of them had a belief that plants probably have some kind of a brain, some kind of a thought pattern. They are living beings, but plants having a brain, for a long time it was like something written in a book, and therefore just because Aristotle has said it, it cannot be true kind of. Last month, 2016 April, it has been shown clearly that plants have prions, and those prions are giving memory to plants. So plants have a memory. Also, there's a root to transition zone which has been shown a couple of years back. So there is an ability to think and rationally make a decision, which doesn't completely still show that there is a brain or an organ called the brain in the plant, but certainly the plant has an ability to make rational decisions and have a memory with something. Scientists would immediately, someone like me is rewiring or remapping my brain to wrap my head around the fact that yes, indeed, it is a fact now proven that there is memory in plants based on the prion that has been discovered last month. If it was the question of a book that had been written like 200 years ago or 800 years ago, no, that it doesn't, I wouldn't have been able to be able to come to terms with it.
Yes,
As a scientist, I
then
can.
will you appreciate then in that journey?
Yes.
Then
Over
new,
these years,
yeah,
yes.
over the years,
Where
the
at one
new
time
things.
I believed that it wasn't true as a scientist, but now
Yeah.
I'm willing to believe as a
Yeah.
scientist again that it might be
So,
true.
but in that journey, many things, many inventions had
yes.
happened.
But tell me something,
So-
why do you need a journey? Sorry, I'll just...
Exactly.
You say,
I agree.
I say, okay, I interpret, given my current state of whatever knowledge, why do I need to question it? Can't I just be happy with my current
At
level
that
of
time, at that current
understanding
level of
and
understanding,
maintain
yes.
status quo?
And have
What
an
is the
open-minded
need
belief that
See, a lot of it is happening when you're testing those ideas, right? We say science is, a lot of it is testing your hypothesis. Why do we need that kind of activity? What is the value to you, me, human society?
So does science mean being open to new ideas, open-minded?
Let's forget that you're going to get a PhD and a career out of it, but in a larger sense.
But I feel posing some question on something means you are asking why we are posing the question.
Yeah, why do you feel the need to pose a question? Is it a valuable activity or are you just wasting your time?
I should not accept as it is. Means
Why not?
Why not? The big question is why not?
No. It's not. I'm not testing you, but very often, we're addressing the value of science, right? The issue of why is science a valuable activity? Why are we driven to ask these kinds of questions?
I don't know. Because then the curiosity, human mind always has a
Exactly.
curiosity.
Exactly.
If I may say so, in the religious traditions too, for instance, the Quran, the Torah and the Bible have been around for hundreds of years, but every generation has accessed them differently. There are hundreds of years of exegesis and scholarship, and interpretation and jurisprudence and so on. So, the Western world would be unthinkable without these hundreds of years of this thing.
Yeah.
So in that sense, it doesn't seem to me as though there's a book and you take for granted what it is. In fact, the access to the book is constantly in question with every generation. And for our generation, even to know the original languages is a big issue. Do I have access to the Jnaneshwari written in the 13th century, written in Old Marathi? I'd have to pick up Old Marathi. Even my modern Marathi won't give me access to it. So there are all these issues which I guess mean that a certain kind of philological or scientific curiosity is needed even to read religious texts.
Yes.
So okay, that actually is an important point. So
Exactly.
You need to be able to, a mathematician wouldn't understand it at all unless you
no, but no. Again, so is this perhaps one of the differences, because you're talking more about, let's say, philosophical inquiry, right? When you say I reinterpret the books and so on, but I don't statistically test what the book says, right? Right. Science is based on that activity. It doesn't accept it accepts, however, time being, and then tests its validity or awaits till the technology arrives, or you can test it. Is that a fundamental difference? Like the difference between philosophy and science. Sorry. Yeah.
I think there is a quantitative aspect to it, which is very interesting. Because when I say that my model doesn't fit something, it's also to some extent in a quantitative fashion. That kind of makes me nervous that why it is not fitting. And so this quantitative aspect is, I think, very important in terms of our investigations.
Yeah. Also more fundamentally, you make a model you test that model rigorously, hopefully, but generally, and only when it meets all the criteria, you accept it as probable truth, right? In now religion gets closer to philosophy. I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, right? It's a philosophical question. I'm reinterpreting. It's like, who am I? We could have debated 3,000 years ago. We can debate it today and still not get any wiser. In many, we still have our points of view. But in the discussion, if I come up with a hypothesis as to who am I, and I provide experimental or whatever validation, that validation of an idea that stands at least some window of test of time, would that be one of the distinctions?
You started with a very interesting point that, what is science any closer to, or is it now at a distance from wisdom?
That is, okay.
And the running thread in all religions is what they call the sapiential tradition, wisdom traditions, like the Book of Job, or where there's questioning, where there's anguish. And those are the books of wisdom, So in some sense, when you say that, are you saying that science has already attained a certain level of questioning, or do you feel that it's come away from wisdom? And what did you mean when you said wisdom?
So what I meant it so in the sense that the shift to looking at what science gives back to society, only the deliverable components of science, as opposed to understanding the larger picture of how the universe, understanding functioning of the nature around us. So in that sense, is that aspect of science. What happens is the way we now, the way things are now put is what do you get, what are you giving back to society, and it's always a materialistic perspective, right? Do I give you a new medicine, or a new, but what I give in terms of contributing to understanding the universe, right? The whole Renaissance started as an intellectual exercise. And there's no gainsaying the value of it. And it's not just science, but philosophy and so on. Philosophy is more or less a dead art now. Nobody has time for it, right? We can't even write full sentences anymore. It's all SMS text messages. So the capacity to articulate ideas we are losing. I may be completely wrong. But looking at this way, so the value that wisdom can give to a society from a purely humanistic aspect, which science can also contribute in terms of understanding. And to me, the major way in the scientific temper can contribute is by bringing in the culture of uncertainty. To me, the biggest value of science is you're never certain, as opposed to dogmatic creeds and that you have. And in many ways, that can be the largest contribution that science could make at a societal level. Are we ignoring those aspects and focusing more on material, tangible, immediate deliverables, right? We still don't know what Einstein's, relativity actually contributed to improving the quality of life. But I'm sure everybody is glad that he was there and, made the discoveries he did. Are we devaluating such kinds of, that's what I meant in a limited context, so to speak.
I'm sort of curious to know, has this communication between science and religion over the past 3,000 years been a one-way street, or it has been, a good confluence of ideas? It's been a two-way street.
So many of the early scientists were deeply religious, right? Newton was very religious. Some of the giants in biology were clergy.
So definitely the questions, the basic questions were sort of motivated from religion. But is it something tangible that went from religion all the way to science?
See, Copernicus was clergy, right? And when he came out with the alternate, it was not accepted. But that is at that time. So perhaps today it may be accepted. And in many ways, the Renaissance, you may know better, was a rebellion against the strict doctrines of
these examples are one-way street sort of a communication.
Correct.
Science
Yeah.
to religion.
Right.
I'm more curious to know if
Very interesting idea. Yeah. I don't know, anybody has an idea? Yeah. That's an interesting point.
Start taking in some of the subjective aspects and put it into your science and say, okay.
There,
I mean, to my mind, it.
there has been some cases,
Okay.
like there has been some cases like some known doctors, medical practitioners, and some others people they were scientists, and later they found something strikingly similar or something, then they converted into a believer. There have been some examples, but so far the religion itself has been a driving force for many people to inquire. But of course the inquisitiveness is our inherent property, but sometimes it's motivate even further.
No, that's I can ask you. If we say curiosity is an essential tenet of human, then I can be religious and inquire, I can be irreligious and also inquire. Right. So we've had both streams. So religion is only providing a framework for inquiry. Somebody else who's not religious may have an alternate framework for inquiry. So is religion really the driving force for inquiry? Or is it the driving force for sense of security, like you said?
It seems to answer for instance, the Swadeshi scientists, and of course the famous Bengali scientist who spoke about plants being sentient. Those people, I think, were driven by some kind of a curiosity. They were, while in the midst of their scientific, in the middle of their scientific practice, they were also reading Sankhya and Vaisheshika and all that kind of thing.
It is more a scientific method also to go back to the traditional methods and find out from the traditional practitioners why they have been using, let's say, that particular herb, and then even today we're going back to traditional methods and trying to extract out what was the scientific unit, molecule, factor in that herb or that traditional method of practicing medicine, let's say. What is the scientific basis for it? So we are perpetually doing a two-way confluence. We are going back to traditional methods.
No, but again, are we risking a confusion there? So when you talk about Sankhya, Nyaya, Vaisheshika and all, these were thoughts used in religious activity, right, for the Vedic rituals. But in many ways, Sankhya, we talk about equilibration of opposing forces essentially. So I could treat it as in a sense the seed of physics, which it may be, and causality, the Nyaya, Vaisheshika and so on. But were they, they were more of an intellectual activity, there was no religious framework for that, right? And yes, what I got is like, we keep saying, the numbers that came up from India, the zero or whatever. The tragedy was we didn't use it for developing mathematics, right? We used it for measuring altar sizes, dimensions for our rituals. So that's why it didn't grow into a science. That's why finally, it went to the Arabs and from there to Europe and so on.